You know, this is the busiest week of the year for me. Pull together everything from Indy 500 qualifying, prepare for the big race on Sunday, also get around to covering the Sleep Therapy Grand Prix on the same weekend. What I really don't have time for is a massive scandal dating back years that calls the entire integrity of IndyCar into question. But you know how it goes. Sometimes we can't just have nice things. Let's start with some background. This is the Indy 500, one of the biggest races in international motorsports. 33 drivers hurtling around a huge oval at an average speed of well over 200 miles per hour. And despite having to do this 200 times in a single afternoon, every now and then one of them forgets about it being an oval and launches their car into the f***ing stratosphere. Before that though comes qualifying, where rather than measure lap time, each driver completes 4 tours of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, with their average speed being what determines their place on the starting grid. Spots 13 through to 29 are decided on day 1, with the fastest 12 going into the Fast 12 and anyone 30th or lower going into Bump Day, where they compete to see who starts on the final row of the grid and who gets a weekend's extra holiday. We can cover all that in my comedy review on the event later in the week. For now, let's focus on that Fast 12 session, and more specifically Team Penske. If you're here used to my Formula 1 content, let me put this into perspective for you. Penske are a bit like the Ferrari of IndyCar, only they're actually f***ing competent. The team are owned by namesake Roger Penske. Roger Penske also owns the IndyCar Series and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, because that's apparently not a conflict of interest whatsoever. That issue raised its head at the beginning of the 2024 season, where driver Joseph Newgarden was caught being a rather naughty boy and using his push-to-pass system on the restart in the Grand Prix of St. Petersburg, once again not the Russian one. Thing is, he shouldn't have been able to. Newgarden would go on to win that event, only to be later disqualified, along with Penske teammate Scott McLaughlin, who came home third. All 3 Penske drivers were docked 10 championship points, fined $25,000 each, and just to top it off, Roger himself suspended 4 of the top-level personnel in the organisation, including the team's own president, Tim Cindric. Considering this was already the first IndyCar disqualification in 29 years, the resulting fallout, plus Joseph Newgarden blubbering to the press and providing us with a vast array of new memes, was enough to appease the general public for now. And by the time the season wrapped up a few months later, it was all water under the bridge. Newgarden had just missed out on the 2024 title, but had at least managed to win the esteemed Indy 500, following a thrilling last lap duel with McLaren's Pato O'Ward. We'll come back to this later. So the 2025 edition of the race rolls around, and once again, Penske are looking like the team to beat. All 3 cars of Newgarden, McLaughlin and Will Power progressing into Sunday's Fast 12 session. This was all rather important, following one of the team's worst starts to a championship in the outfit's history, and the 3-car of McLaughlin had looked particularly rapid, aiming to make it back-to-back poles at the speedway until he did this in morning practice. One of the big contenders for pole was now out of the equation, leaving Penske's focus on the remaining 2 entries of Power and Newgarden, and this is where things begin to go wrong. Before the session, all cars had to go through a mandated technical inspection to ensure they still meet all the rules and regulations before hitting the track. The stewarding team gave the 12-car of Power the once-over and released it with no problems. However, when they looked at Newgarden's number 2 machine, they did find a problem. The rear attenuator of the car, for the non-technical people in my audience, just think of that as its prostate, failed what was described as a body fit violation according to IndyCar personnel. What Penske had done was fill in or blend the gap between this part and the remainder of the chassis. And if you're wondering why we're stressing over a blended arsehole of all things, well, when you're going for outright average speed, you want to make your Indy car as slick and as streamlined as possible. That means reducing as much drag off the car's surfaces as you can, and even a small gap like this in the rear of the car could well lead up to fractions of a mile per hour being added to your overall qualifying effort. Considering this was one of the closest fields in the series history, that could carry a pretty significant advantage. And I say could because in reality we'll never know, but IndyCar's rules clearly state that such modifications are not permitted, and any car caught carrying them would be subject to the deepest butt-f***ing you'd ever see. So Newgarden's machine failed this particular inspection, and soon after, images came in of the team frantically trying to undo their hard work, taking what I would call the Jeremy Clarkson approach and going at it with a f***ing angle grinder. It was understood at the time that if they could return their car to regulation spec, they might still be allowed to compete in the session, and as championship rival Alex Palou watched on with the worst poker face imaginable, reality set in, and Newgarden's car was rolled out of pit road and removed from qualifying. But that wasn't the end of things. You see, the 2-car wasn't the only Penske machine taking the role of shame, as soon after, the 12-car of Will Power was also being taken back into the garage. It had passed inspection initially, but was later found to have the same modification. As for Scott McLaughlin, well, he had found a new way to unblend his rear attenuator, but wasn't going to make it out for qualifying regardless. With the team that locked at the front row in 2024 now out of proceedings, things continued as normal, and we got one of the best qualifying days in recent memory. That's all again for Sunday's video though, as this scandal somehow gets even worse. While Penske initially tried to play this as water under the bridge, complete with comical scenes of Newgarden attempting his qualifying run on foot, questions were immediately being asked over how the 12 of Power made it through inspections despite having the blended rear. Well, other than proving IndyCar's officials are as rigorous as this guy, no one can really answer that. But the other big dilemma was how long have these devices actually been fitted to the cars. IndyCar's president, Doug Bowles, was quick to argue that this was a new solution for the Penske team, only to be quickly torn to 1,000 pieces by the press in a news conference, with several teams claiming to have evidence of the blended attenuator being on the car well before Sunday. This would have made the Penskes illegal in that opening qualifying session, meaning poor old Jacob Abel was bumped from his first Indy 500 for no reason. That would be a shame if anybody cared. The focus instead was down to whether the Penske cars should be able to run at all, currently starting 10th, 11th and 12th with enough pace to win the race from there anyway. With Roger Penske and the inevitable conflicts of interest back in the spotlight, it was clear more action would be taken, and oh boy it sure did. Power and Newgarden were shuffled to the back row of the starting grid for Sunday's event, each entry was fined $100,000, and chief scapegoat Cindric was suspended yet again. As for McLaughlin's car, that was apparently inspected and found to be completely legal, though as you can imagine, IndyCar fans on social media are having a f***ing aneurysm over that one. A final statement for Bowles was meant to tie a bow in this beautiful shit sandwich. The integrity of the Indianapolis 500 is paramount, and this violation of the IndyCar rule against modification to the parts and using it as supplied is clear. The penalty should be more than simply starting where the cars might have qualified anyway, if given the opportunity. The cars belong in the field as two of the fastest 33. However, starting from the tail of the field is the appropriate penalty in this instance. So, are we done? Well, of course not. As we mentioned earlier, Penske have a history of being good at the 500, and Newgarden has won the last two runnings of the race on the bounce. His victorious machine from 2024 still on display at the Circuit's Museum, and upon inspection of that, well, looky what we have here. So it's important to note that just because the modification exists here, that's no guarantee that it was necessarily on the car when it crossed the finish line a year ago. For all we know, it was added after that, and granted I have no clue why the f*** you would decide to do that, and even in the scripting of this video, images have surfaced reportedly showing the blended attenuator on both Newgarden and McLaughlin's Penskes at the 2024 race, in which case, well, what happens now? Does Newgarden lose that historic win? It's worth remembering as well, he got a $440,000 bonus from Borg Warner after being the first driver to win back-to-back 500s since Helio Castroneves in 2002. So does he have to give that back? Should they even be allowed to compete in this year's 500? It all gets very complicated, and if I'm honest, he'll probably end up keeping that win, but it will surely sour the history of the moment in the long term. Likewise, what does the future hold for Roger Penske? As time goes on, his role at the top of IndyCar looks increasingly untenable, while he still owns a team in the sport, particularly considering the series is already under fire after introducing a hybrid power unit that's only made the racing worse. But don't worry guys, we get the Weenie 500 to make up for it. No, I'm not making that up. On the bright side at least, the rest of the field have tried to see the funny side, with the teams racing to be the quickest to update their start grid graphics, and slowest qualifier Arenas VK telling the media, if you told me on Saturday I'd be starting on the same row as the two Penskes, I'd have been thrilled. If you want my honest thoughts though, well yes, there is now an emerging pattern with this team when it comes to just not reading the rulebook apparently. I'm struggling to sit here and think this is a deliberate violation of the rules. More like Penske have found this improves performance and just not realised it broke the IndyCar rulebook. Let's be honest, if you'd won the Indy 500 with a car you knew was illegal, would you really have the balls to then stick said illegal car on display at a museum for the public to scrutinise? You'd either have the bollocks the size of space hoppers for that, or you'd just have to be a complete f***ing idiot. Then again, this is America, so who knows? It's not a great look though from one of the most successful teams this series has ever seen, and I think 2024's Indy 500 runner-up, Pato O'Ward, puts it best. You just don't need to take the risk at the end of the day. Anyway, let me know your thoughts on this down in the comments below. Hopefully IndyCar's biggest scandal, since I actually don't even know when, doesn't take away from the spectacle we expect to see on Sunday. If you've not watched IndyCar before, and are here because you have this love of tea or watching rich people get anally finger blasted by the world's media, try tuning in on Sunday. You'll really not be disappointed considering what Monaco usually offers. I'll be covering both of those as well, so if you haven't already, make sure you get subscribed and hit that notification bell to see all of that. Big thank you to the members and patrons who also get more exclusive content this week as Liam Lawson's 2025 season goes even more to shit. Links down below if you want to get involved in all that or just support the channel. I'll be back on Sunday then. Until that point, have a good one.